So today we're back on the challenge of fixing the deck of the boat. Peter is cutting some small stringers of the deck off to be more flexible for us to move into the right position. It's getting to a point that eventually you might need to cut the deck out, and I really don't want to do that, cut the entire deck out and build the deck again. That'll be like a month of work. So what's the problem? This deck should have a center line on the middle, right here. And this center line should be higher on the stern and lower on the bow with a curve, and also with a curve sideways, parallel. So it goes the same angle here, the same angle there. The problem is when the boatyard welded the pipe for the chain locker, they welded the center reinforcement just in one side, and that happened that now it deformed more on port side than on the starboard side. So that means the highest point right now is here and not on the center line. This is the center line. We need to put that point down. Here there is a low spot, here there is a low spot, there is a low spot, here there is a high spot. That means this center part is all bent in so many directions that, to be honest, I think the right thing to do is to cut this square, this big square, and put a new plate. Gonna be also complicated because we need to create a shape, we need to have the frames on the bottom, blah 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 blah. We decide, let's try one more thing before we go to the last solution. That is, we're gonna open a release cut right in the center and a release cut right here. With this release cut, we hope we can put this plate down and shrink this bubble, and with this release cut we can pump it up and weld it again, and we can fix this area. We'll try and see what happens. The thickness of the blade won't pass through this hole anymore, and that means there was too much tension on the plate because we cut a hole this big and suddenly it's like this big. So that means it went to place a little bit already, and that's good news. And once we weld, it's gonna go even more to place because it's gonna shrink. We weld, and as soon as it cools down, it's gonna shrink, and when it shrinks, it's gonna be shorter, the plate, and that's what we want. The plate is too large for the amount of space you have, and then it creates a bow, either down or up, in this case up. So you're trying to take that bow out. I think it's gonna work, to be honest. I'm somehow positive. The idea now is that we're going to create reinforcements on the bottom, stringers on the shape we want, and then we weld the plate back together on the top of it. I release the tension of the plate. We cut a little slot on the reinforcement on the flange of the frame, and we are jacking up this frame because this entire frame is low at least 6 millimeters, and in order to put it up we need to take some brace off, otherwise it won't go up, and even if it goes up, it won't stay. Now that we have a release cut on the T, on the flange, we can jack it up and then we weld again, and that means it's gonna hold from coming back to the same position. That's what we hope. I believe it will work because we did that to another frame there and it worked really well, and it's going up much better than before now that we have a lot less tension on the plate. So let's go to the deck and just get some measurements to guarantee we are on the right direction.
1 millimeter.
So these two jacks on the frame helped a lot already. The frame is pretty much spot on the position we want. It's just like 1 millimeter off. That's almost nothing. So my idea now is to put a third jack right in the center of the low spot and try to raise the low spot and see what happens. And if we shape the deck properly, we can just start welding reinforcements and start welding bars to make sure that the deck won't go back to place as soon as we release the jacks. That's the tricky part, because putting in position sometimes is not too hard. The hard thing is to take the jacks out and keep the deck where you want. Let's see if this works. Now that the weld cooled down already, we're gonna try to take the jack out and see if the frame stays in place.
Oh, now it moved.
So we fixed a little bit. We got half of the problem solved, half went back. So the idea now is to do the same thing we did to the flange, to the bottom part of the frame. We're gonna do to the center of the frame. We're gonna cut this much of the top of the frame off, create space, jack it up and weld it again. That means it's gonna be strong enough, but we're gonna try to space a little bit more, because once we cut we can space and fill up with weld. I think it's gonna be good enough. So before we cut this frame, just one quick disclaimer. If we do a small cut on the frame and we weld it back together, it won't make the frame weaker. By the way, this frame is composed with many different parts welded together to compose the frame, and it's really strong. I mean, it's gonna be as strong as before. It's not gonna make any difference except that it's gonna be on the right shape. So yesterday I didn't come to work because I need to go to the embassy to get the new passport for Oli and Roberta. But check it out, a lot of progress. So Peter already welded the patch that we did here, the fixing, and it actually worked. That's awesome. It's in place, it's not curved on the wrong position anymore. So this is fixed. Most of the deck's done. It's just a lot of grinding to do now. But also we found another bump here, a small bump. So we're gonna do the same that we did here. There, just a release cut, and then we can put it back in place and weld it again, and like that we're gonna get ready of that little bump. It's not a big one, that one, but now that we fixed one, it doesn't make sense to leave a little bump if everything else is on the right position. Let's do all the way. I was editing this video and I realized that it might be a little bit confusing for a lot of you to understand exactly what we did to fix the deck problem. And that's not your problem, that's my problem, because sometimes I don't explain myself properly, and also because we were discovering how to fix as we go. So that means it's hard to document because we didn't know exactly what we were gonna do from the beginning. We were just experimenting until we fix the problem. So I'm gonna run you through step by step just to make sure you understand exactly what we did. So first of all, what was our problem? So let me try to explain. Not sure if this is gonna work because this is actually a lot stronger than I thought it would be, but I'll get there. So imagine that I want this plate to be flat. I don't want this curve. So this is pretty much a thin MDF that it can be push and pull. So technically I could just push this in position because this can bend, right? This is flexible. But the problem is that there is not enough space in between this wood and this wood for this plate to be flat because there is too much panel for the space. So if I push, it will move, and eventually it's gonna pop up to the other side. Right now, the bubble is to the top. If I put a lot of force, I don't know if you can see that properly. If I put a lot of force, what will happen? It's gonna break. I put too much force. Let me do it again. This is too strong for my experiment. Let's try to use something else. I found something that I think is gonna work. That's perfect. So let's imagine that this is the deck of the boat and that right here the deck should be flat, but there is a bump, there is a curve. If I try to press this curve down to put the deck in the right position, look what happens. It will deform, 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 and eventually it goes the opposite way. It's gonna go down. There is not enough space in between these two pieces of chipboard to have this plate straight. I'm gonna try to solve this problem here so you understand. I'm gonna run you through each one of these steps. So step number one is we need to create a space and we need to release the tension, because here there is not much tension because it's a soft material. By the way, this is a really cool material that we've been experimenting with. We're gonna show you in a future video once we have the results of the experiments, but that's a really cool one. So the first thing, we need to take the tension off the plate and we need to create space for the plate to be flat. So how do we do that? Step number one, imagine that this is the angle grinder. If you cut a slot, now the plate can be flat. But of course this is an extreme example and the bump was huge, so there is no space still. So just for the sake of the experiment, I'm gonna cut this slot a little bit bigger. All we gotta do now is to weld this together, right? Not necessarily. I wish it was that simple. The problem is that aluminum, it deforms a lot when you weld. And the reason for that is because aluminum is a really good heat dissipator. And that means when you weld two plates together, a lot of the heat of the weld is dissipated through the material and you lose a lot of the heat. And that means that in order to have a good penetration, you need to put a lot of heat in the weld to guarantee a good penetration. And that also means that when the weld cools down, it was really hot and then cools down, the weld shrinks. And when it shrinks, it deforms. And of course, the plate has different tension all over the place. The tension here could be different to the tension here. And that means when it cools down, it won't deform in a linear way. It can deform in a different way here. It could go down here, it could go up here. It depends on the tension of the plate. So, what do you do to avoid that? You need to try to brace as much as you can, and that's why you do tack welds. The tack weld is a way of bracing the plate to try to avoid the deformation. So in this case that's really extreme, we tried to brace as much as we could. So the technique was, we got a really strong reinforcement bar, like a square pipe, and we welded parallel to the cut, right next to the cut, on the outside of the deck. Of course, this bar is not there anymore. There was just a temporary reinforcement to keep the shape so we could do the weld. So if this bar welded to the side of the plate cannot move anymore on this direction. It can only move on this direction because this is braced already. But it still can move up and down here, right? So, in order to avoid that movement, we need to create brace in the other direction, 90 degrees to this brace, and then we have a brace in both directions. And that's why we added these little brackets that you saw in the video. So it's just a flat bar with a little V shape in the center, and the reason why we have this V shape in the center is just for the line of weld to be right on the center, and you have enough space that you can actually weld with the bracket in place. So Peter welded along the seam, along the cut, one bracket every around 5 centimeters or so. So one bracket, one bracket, one bracket, and so on for the entire line of weld. And then the other side was not welded yet, so that means you had this fixed to one side and loose on the other side. The reason for that is because we needed to align the deck and we wanted to put some jacks on the bottom to make sure we can align before we weld the other side. By the way, these ideally would be welded to the bottom of the plate, not to the top. But as we want to have car jacks on the bottom to control the deformation before we welded the other side of the bracket, it was easier to put on the top. So we put on the top, we jack it up, we welded the other side, and we keep doing that until we have all the brackets welded. And then we also added another bar on the other side parallel to the cut. So in this way, we had a brace on this direction on both sides and brace on the opposite direction all along the cut. And that means we are ready to weld. The reason why Peter wanted to weld the top first, the outside first, is because every time you weld two plates together like this, in order to keep the dimension of the plate, you always leave a little gap in the middle, otherwise it's gonna shrink and you're gonna just deform. So he needed to have like a 2 millimeters gap in between the plates, and if he do the bottom part first, with this gap, it's gonna drip a lot of the weld on him and makes life a lot harder. So he wanted to have at least one line of weld on the top, one pass of weld on the top, and then he could fully weld at the bottom. So with the brace in place, having this V shape, he could actually do one pass of weld on the top. Then he went to the bottom side and he also did two passes on the bottom side. After that, he could add the braces to the bottom after he welded, because he has a space for the weld on the V shape. So he added braces on the bottom, and then he could go to the top and take the braces out to actually fully weld it on the top. So when he took the braces out, here again cleaned the old line of weld, and he did two passes on the top really strongly so he could melt and go through and join together the bottom and the top. With these two lines of weld, these two passes of weld done, he could take all the braces after it cooled down and the deck was fixed. I mean, not 100% yet, because you have a lot of grinding to do to make sure that the deck is as we want. So that's the next step. We need to grind everything to make sure that there is no mistakes, and if there is a mistake, we need to fix the mistake. So Peter finished welding all the fixings on the deck. Now I'm gonna grind everything so it's easier to see, because it's really hard to see if there is anything we still need to fix, if there is a lot of distractions. So all these welds need to be grind down. Yeah, it's sometimes you need to see what you need to see. If there is a mistake we need to fix, if there is no mistake, that's awesome, and then we can move on to the roof. That's the idea. Yeah, this was a long one. This episode took us at least 2 weeks to film, and the reason for that is because it's really hard to fix a problem that you don't know exists. You discover a problem and then you keep digging and digging and digging and you find more problems. And during this time, I went over all the footage from when they actually built the deck of the boat, and I tried to figure out when did things go wrong. At first, I thought the frames were the only problem, the height of the frames. The truth is, yes, the frames were one of the problems. The height of the frames should be on a certain height that the line on the top is a streamline that have the right curvature from stern to bow, and it was not done like that. They didn't properly measure. It was higher, lower, and that doesn't make sense. But that was not the only problem. One of the biggest problems, to be honest, is that our deck had too much tension on the material. The deck was under tension a lot, and the reason for that I remember perfectly. When they tried to install the deck in place at first, I don't know if we put that on the video or not, but they tried twice. The plate of the deck didn't fit the space they had. This deck was built in two different panels. One panel on the starboard and one on the port. They put together and welded together outside of the boat, and then they just put this huge panel on top of the boat and welded there. I don't know if you call tow rail, but the side plate of the boat goes higher than the deck. So that means you have a certain space for the deck to fit in. And when they tried to put it, wouldn't fit. The plate was too big for the space they had. And the reason for that is because when they welded it together, they didn't control the distance perfectly in between the both panels. That's what I believe. And then they end up with a deck that was bigger than the design. And instead of grinding until they got the right dimension to put in place, they forced into position. They put a lot of something like this. They try to expand the boat in order to to force into position the deck. And when you do that, eventually you will spend enough that the deck goes to the position, and then you weld the deck and then you let it go. But when you do that, you create a lot of tension because the boat is going to compress the deck a lot. But now it's fully welded and it's going to hold the shape, but there's a lot of tension, internal tension on the material. And that is what creates a lot of deformation, because you create a hole for the window in one side, you don't create on the other side. That means it's going to deform differently because it's not all the same in both sides of the deck. And that created a lot of trouble. Luckily, we managed to bring it back to a condition that I'm happy with. Is it perfect? No. If you look with magnified glass, any boat, it's never 100% perfect. There is always little things, that's normal, but it's good enough for what we expect, and I think that's awesome. And now at least we can move on and fix the next problem, because the tension on the deck and the shape of the deck didn't create only trouble for the deck, it also created a lot of trouble, maybe even bigger trouble, to the roof of the boat. And that's what we're going to talk about on the next episode. But before we wrap up this episode, just one more thing really quick. If you're curious to see other projects that we already done to the boat, we just shot a really quick boat tour just to show you things that are happening in real time. And we do that all the time for our members, but this week we decide to put it publicly. Anyone can watch. You don't need to be a member. You click on this link somewhere here, and then you can watch this video. And if you like and you want to watch more of those videos, then you can become a member. But if you don't, you just watch this one. This one's a free one. Enjoy.